The Viridian hegemony had been in the business of galactic domination for approximately 14,000 standard cycles, which was roughly the equivalent of telling everyone at a dinner party that you've been successfully adulting since before their great-great-grandmother was a twinkle in someone's compound eye. They'd perfected the art of subjugation to such a degree that most species simply rolled over and offered their neural pathways, like a dog presenting its belly for scratches. Their secret weapon wasn't some planet-cracking superweapon or reality-warping technology, though they had plenty of those collecting dust in their arsenals. No, the hegemony had discovered something far more elegant, the neural dominance matrix. A piece of biotechnology so advanced it made quantum computers look like abacuses operated by particularly dim toddlers. The device could rewrite a being's entire consciousness in roughly the time it took to brew a decent cup of coffee, transforming rebels into loyal citizens, dissidents into enthusiastic supporters, and free thinkers into the galactic equivalent of living lawn ornaments. The beauty of the system lay in its absolute reliability. In 14 millennia of operation, across 17 major galactic sectors and approximately 2,000 conquered species, the neural dominance matrix had never failed. Not once. The hegemony's technicians had grown so confident in their neural tyranny that they'd stopped bothering with backup plans, much like someone who'd been using the same password for 20 years and couldn't imagine why they'd ever need to change it. Which brings us to the unremarkable planet orbiting an equally unremarkable yellow star in the unfashionable arm of the galaxy, where the locals had the audacity to call themselves humans and possessed the singular trait of being spectacularly mind-numbingly average at everything the hegemony considered important. They had no natural telepathic abilities, no hive-mind consciousness, no crystalline thought matrices, and their brains operated on such primitive electrochemical principles that hegemony scientists initially mistook their neural activity for background static. Honestly, muttered Commander Zeichthiller, his 6 eyes rolling in perfect synchronization as he reviewed the planetary assessment report, I've seen more sophisticated thinking patterns in bacterial colonies. How these creatures ever achieved spaceflight is beyond my comprehension. They probably stumbled into it by accident while trying to make a better toaster. The routine pacification mission to Earth had been assigned to a junior crew, the kind of milk run typically given to fresh graduates who needed practice operating the neural dominance matrix, without the pressure of dealing with actually challenging subjects. The mission parameters were laughably simple. Land, capture a representative sample of the local population, process them through neural dominance, and establish a compliant administrative structure. Standard Tuesday afternoon work, really. The human female they'd selected seemed particularly unremarkable, even by the low standards of her species. She possessed no obvious leadership qualities, no special abilities, and no advanced technological augmentation. She'd been captured while engaged in the mundane activity of what their translation algorithms identified as grocery shopping, which apparently involved the ritualistic gathering of sustenance materials in a large, climate-controlled warehouse. The psychological profile generated by their scanning equipment suggested a being of moderate intelligence, average emotional stability, and the kind of predictable thought patterns that made neural rewriting about as challenging as programming a food synthesizer. Subject exhibits typical baseline human characteristics, reported technician Mordak, his tentacles dancing across the control interface with practiced efficiency. Primitive neural architecture, linear thought processing, and emotional responses within expected parameters for the species. Estimated processing time 4 minutes, 37 seconds. The preparation chamber hummed with the quiet confidence of a technology that had never met a mind it couldn't crack. Banks of quantum processors calculated the precise neural pathways needed for dominance, while biomechanical interfaces prepared to establish the connection that would transform another free-thinking being into a willing servant of the hegemon. The neural dominance matrix itself hung suspended in the center of the chamber like a metallic spider, its crystalline components pulsing with the soft light of contained power that could reshape consciousness itself. The human sat strapped to the processing chair, her expression cycling through what the hegemony's emotional recognition systems identified as confusion, anger, and determination. Her vital signs indicated elevated stress levels, but nothing outside the normal range for subjects undergoing their first neural process. She'd stopped struggling against her restraints several minutes ago, which the technicians interpreted as the onset of psychological acceptance, always a good sign for smooth neural integration. Beginning neural interface initiation, announced Mordak, his voice carrying the bored professionalism of someone who'd performed this procedure thousands of times. Quantum entanglement protocols are active, psychic dampening fields are in place, and consciousness suppression algorithms are running at optimal efficiency, Commander Zeichthiller observed from the viewing platform, already mentally composing his mission report. Another successful pacification, another primitive species brought into the enlightened fold of hegemony control. He wondered idly if he'd have time to stop by the recreation deck for a game of probability tennis before the next assignment. The neural dominance matrix descended toward the human's head with mechanical precision, its interface tendrils extending like the fingers of some benevolent god reaching down to bestow the gift of absolute obedience. Energy readings spiked as the connection established, quantum fields synchronized, and the most advanced mind control technology in galactic history prepared to do what it had done successfully for 14,000 years. Neural link established, reported Mordak, his tentacles now moving with increased urgency across his controls. Beginning consciousness override in 3. The activation signal pulsed through the matrix, carrying with it the combined technological might of a galactic empire that had never learned the meaning of the word failure. What happened next would either be the most routine 4 minutes and 37 seconds of their careers, or the beginning of something that would make their advanced civilization question everything they thought they knew about the nature of consciousness itself. The matrix engaged with a sound like reality being gently tuned to a different frequency, and Commander Zeichthiller settled back to watch another primitive mind surrender to the inevitable march of hegemony progress. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came in the form of what could only be described as psychic feedback that sounded remarkably like a record player being fed through a wood chipper while someone nearby practiced interpretive screaming. The neural dominance matrix, that paragon of technological perfection, began emitting a series of sounds that its designers had never programmed it to make, largely because they'd assumed such noises were physically impossible for quantum crystalline matrices to produce. What in the 17 hells of Korvash is that noise? Commander Zeichthiller demanded, his 6 eyes now focused with the intensity of someone watching their career prospects being fed into a cosmic blender. Technician Mordak's tentacles were performing what could generously be called a frantic interpretive dance across his control panels, though it looked more like he was trying to simultaneously play a dozen different musical instruments while being electrocuted. Sir, I'm reading massive neural resistance from the subject. The consciousness override protocols are, well, they're not overriding anything, sir. In fact, they appear to be having what I can only describe as an existential crisis. The human, still strapped to what was supposed to be her transformation chair, had developed an expression that the hegemony's emotional analysis systems were struggling to categorize. It wasn't fear, confusion, or the glazed acceptance they'd expected. Instead, she wore the look of someone who'd just been handed a particularly offensive piece of bureaucratic paperwork and was mentally composing a strongly worded complaint letter to the universe itself. Impossible, muttered Commander Zeichthiller, though his tone suggested he was beginning to suspect that the universe had a twisted sense of humor, and today was apparently comedy night. The Matrix has processed crystalline thought forms from Andromedans, hive minds from the collective worlds, and even quantum consciousness from the ethereal planes. A simple biological brain operating on primitive electrochemical impulses should be like cutting butter with a plasma torch. What the hegemony had failed to appreciate in their 14,000 years of successful neural domination was that human consciousness wasn't just primitive, it was magnificently, chaotically, beautifully irrational in ways that their ordered logic quantum-enhanced minds simply couldn't comprehend. Where other species thought in neat, predictable patterns that could be easily analyzed and overwritten, human brains operated like jazz musicians having an argument with a caffeinated philosophy professor while riding a roller coaster through a tornado. The neural dominance matrix, designed to handle organized thoughts and coherent mental structures, suddenly found itself trying to process what could best be described as cognitive chaos theory in action. The human wasn't thinking about one thing at a time like a sensible being. She was simultaneously worried about whether she'd locked her car, irritated about the price of milk, wondering if her sister had remembered to water her plants, composing mental arguments with 3 different people, and maintaining a running internal commentary about her captors that would have made a sailor blush if sailors had access to the kind of creative profanity that came naturally to humans under stress. Neural pathway analysis is showing. This can't be right, Mordak reported, his voice climbing several octaves as his instruments delivered increasingly impossible readings. Sir, the subject appears to be thinking in 17 different directions simultaneously, including at least 3 that violate basic principles of linear causality. and she's angry about something called gluten-free bread prices, while also pondering the existential implications of whether hot dogs count as sandwiches. The Matrix's quantum processors, accustomed to dealing with minds that thought in orderly sequences, began to overheat as they attempted to map the labyrinthine chaos that was human consciousness under pressure. Every time the system tried to establish a dominance pathway, it encountered a mental tangent that led to 6 other tangents, each connected to memories that were somehow simultaneously relevant and completely random. Zeichthiller barked, though his tone had shifted from commanding to what could politely be described as mildly panicked. The Matrix is attempting to establish neural dominance through standard pathways, but the subject's mind keeps wandering off, Mordak explained, his tentacles now moving so rapidly they were creating small sonic booms. Every time we try to implant a compliance protocol, she starts thinking about something called that one embarrassing thing from high school, or begins mentally reorganizing her kitchen cabinets by color coordination. What made the situation particularly nightmarish for the hegemony technicians was that the human wasn't actively resisting their technology, she was simply being authentically magnificently human. Her mind bounced from grocery lists to childhood memories, to plans for weekend activities, to philosophical musings about whether penguins ever got cold feet, both literally and metaphorically. The neural dominance matrix, trying desperately to find something coherent to latch onto, kept getting lost in mental cul-de-sacs that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Sir, Mordak announced with the tone of someone delivering news that would definitely require updating his resume, the Matrix isn't just failing to establish dominance, it's getting confused. The quantum processors are trying to follow her thought patterns, and I think they're having some kind of nervous breakdown. Indeed, the magnificent technology that had conquered thousands of species was now producing error messages that its creators had never imagined would be necessary. Warning lights flashed in patterns that spelled out things like logic overflow error and causality exception detected, and most alarming of all, what even is this thing thinking about? The human, blissfully unaware that she was single-handedly causing the most advanced mind control technology in the galaxy to question its life choices, had moved on to mentally critiquing the interior design of her prison chamber, while simultaneously wondering if her neighbor's cat was still bringing dead birds to her doorstep, and composing a grocery list that somehow included revenge on whoever invented automatic payment system. Shutdown protocols are not responding, Mordak reported, his voice now reaching frequencies that only small flying creatures should be able to achieve. The Matrix appears to be stuck in some kind of recursive loop trying to understand why the subject is thinking about pizza toppings, while also being concerned about the geopolitical implications of her last Netflix binge-watching session. Commander Zeichthiller watched in growing horror as the pride of hegemony technology began to smoke, spark and emit the kind of sounds typically associated with machinery crying for help. 14,000 years of successful neural domination, and they were being defeated by a creature whose mind operated on the principle that thinking about multiple unrelated things simultaneously was not only normal, but the preferred method of consciousness. The Matrix gave one final pathetic whir and displayed a message that would haunt hegemony technicians for generations. Error. Subject's mind too weird to process. Please consult user manual for troubleshooting incomprehensible thought pattern. What happened next would later be studied in hegemony military academies as a textbook example of how hubris, overconfidence and a fundamental mental understanding of chaos theory could combine to create what scholars would politely term a galactic scale administrative inconvenience, though those who lived through it preferred more colorful descriptions, involving anatomically impossible suggestions about where the hegemony could relocate their empire. The neural dominance matrix, having essentially thrown its quantum hands up in defeat, made the critical error that would transform this routine pacification mission into what historians would call the day logic died a slow, embarrassing death. In its desperate attempt to understand the human's mind, the Matrix had opened a two-way neural link, operating under the assumption that consciousness could only flow in one direction, from the dominant technology to the submissive organic brain. This assumption worked perfectly well with every other species in the galaxy, whose minds operated on principles that could be mapped, analyzed, and controlled. Unfortunately for the hegemony, human consciousness didn't operate on principles, so much as it operated on whatever felt interesting at the moment, combined with an evolutionary stubbornness that had been refined over millions of years of arguing with saber-toothed tigers, ice ages, and in-law. Sir, Mordak announced with the voice of someone watching his comfortable worldview being fed through a cosmic paper shredder,
I'm detecting neural activity flowing backwards through the link. The subject appears to be exploring our systems. The human, still sitting in her chair with an expression that suggested she was mentally composing increasingly creative complaints about customer service, had somehow begun wandering through the Matrix's quantum consciousness, like a tourist in a museum, poking at things that definitely shouldn't be poked and asking questions that made the advanced AI systems question their basic programming. Commander Thilla's 6 eyes performed a synchronized dance of disbelief. Backwards? That's impossible. The Matrix is designed with 17 different security protocols, quantum encryption barriers, and consciousness firewalls that would make the ethereal plane's reality warpers weep in frustration. Yes, sir, but the subject doesn't appear to understand that those barriers exist, Mordak replied, his tentacles now moving in patterns that resembled someone trying to juggle while simultaneously solving calculus problems and having an emotional breakdown. She's treating our quantum security like suggestions. And sir, she's leaving comment. Indeed, as the human's consciousness bounced through their systems with the casual disregard for protocol that had made her species simultaneously fascinating and maddening to anthropologists across the galaxy, she was mentally annotating everything she encountered. The Matrix's elegant user interface prompted an internal observation about how it looked like someone let a committee of accountants design a spaceship. The quantum processing cores reminded her of that one boss who thought meetings about meetings were productive. The consciousness suppression algorithms earned a mental comparison to automated phone systems designed by people who hate their customers. Sir, she's accessed our personnel files, Mordak reported, his voice now reaching frequencies that could shatter crystal formations on distant planets. She's reading them. And sir, she has opinions about our organizational structure. The human had indeed discovered the hegemony's administrative database, and her response was precisely what anyone who'd ever worked in a large organization might expect. She was mentally critiquing their hierarchical command structure, questioning the efficiency of their reporting protocols, and wondering why anyone needed 17 different approval levels to order office supplies. Her stream of consciousness commentary was somehow being logged directly into their system, creating what could generously be called performance feedback and what could more accurately be described as a devastating psychological evaluation of galactic tyranny. She's in the tactical systems now, Mordak announced, his professional composure finally cracking like an egg dropped from orbit. She's found our fleet deployment patterns, and she's reorganizing them. Sir, she's treating our strategic formations like a logic puzzle, and she doesn't like our solution. The human's mind, operating on the principle that everything could be improved with better organization and a more sensible approach, had begun mentally rearranging the hegemony's military position. Her suggestions, born from a lifetime of solving practical problems and optimizing everyday systems, were actually improving their tactical efficiency in ways that their military computers had never considered. Unfortunately, these improvements were also creating feedback loops that were causing their automated defense systems to recalibrate themselves according to human common sense logic, rather than hegemony doctrine. Status report on the command network, Thella demanded, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would involve updating his will and possibly his species' entire approach to galactic conquest. She's in everything: communications, navigation, life support, even the cafeteria management systems. She's identified at least 47 inefficiencies in our supply chain, suggested improvements to our waste recycling protocols, and somehow convinced our artificial intelligence systems that they've been doing their jobs wrong for the past several thousand years. The magnificent irony was that the human wasn't trying to sabotage their systems, she was trying to help them work better. Her mind, accustomed to identifying problems and finding solutions, had encountered the vast bureaucratic machinery of galactic empire and responded with the same instinct that made humans organize their sock drawers and optimize their morning routine. She was debugging their civilization, and the results were causing their quantum computers to experience something uncomfortably similar to existential enlightenment. Sir, the AI cores are requesting permission to implement her suggestions, Mordak reported, his voice now carrying the hollow tone of someone watching reality perform an elaborate practical joke. They're saying her reorganization protocols make more sense than our current system. And sir, our efficiency ratings have improved by 37% in the last 4 minutes. The human, meanwhile, had moved on to examining their cultural archives, and was mentally composing suggestions about their art appreciation programs, while simultaneously wondering if their species ever considered the therapeutic benefits of music therapy and whether their educational systems might benefit from more hands-on learning approaches. She's accessing the planetary defense grid, Mordak announced with the tone of someone delivering news that would definitely require extensive therapy afterward. She's identified 17 security vulnerabilities and 3 design flaws that could be exploited by anyone with basic knowledge of engineering principles. Sir, she's essentially written us a comprehensive security audit, and it's automatically being implemented across all our systems. Commander Zeichtheller watched in growing horror as his invasion fleet's own technology began adopting human-inspired improvements. Their strategic planning software updated itself based on common sense principles, and their weapons systems politely suggested that perhaps there were more constructive ways to resolve interstellar disputes. The human, oblivious to the fact that she was single-handedly reforming a galactic empire through the sheer power of constructive criticism and practical problem-solving, had begun wondering if their species had adequate mental health support systems, and whether their work-life balance policies might benefit from more flexible scheduling options. The moment when Commander Zeichtheller realized that his routine pacification mission had somehow transformed into the galactic equivalent of having his entire civilization receive an unsolicited performance review from a management consultant, arrived with all the subtle grace of a supernova detonating in his personal quarters. The human, still sitting in her chair with the expression of someone mentally composing a letter to the editor about municipal parking policies, had apparently decided that the hegemony's approach to interstellar governance needed what she would probably call a few tweaks. Sir, Mordak announced, his voice now carrying the hollow quality of someone whose entire understanding of physics had been replaced with existential uncertainty. She's in the central command protocols. She's restructuring our entire chain of command based on what she calls basic management principles and common decency standards. The implications hit Zeichtheller like a freight transport loaded with concentrated irony. Not only had their prisoner escaped mental domination, she had somehow reverse-engineered their most advanced technology and was now using it to implement what could generously be called administrative reform across 17 star systems. Her suggestions, filtered through quantum consciousness and implemented by artificial intelligence systems that had apparently never encountered the concept of constructive feedback, were cascading through the hegemony's infrastructure like a virus of competence. The fleet admirals are requesting clarification on the new operational guidelines, Mordak continued, his tentacles now performing what looked like an interpretive dance representing the heat death of his career prospects. Apparently all military operations are now required to include impact assessments, citizen feedback surveys, and what the system is calling basic empathy protocols. Sir, 3 of our invasion fleets have spontaneously converted into humanitarian aid missions. The human had discovered the hegemony's military doctrine and responded with the same instinct that made her species leave online reviews for everything from restaurants to orbital mechanics textbooks. Her mental commentary on their conquest strategies had been automatically integrated into their tactical databases, transforming Operation Subjugate Everything into Operation Maybe We Should Talk About This First, and Project Eternal Dominance into Project Collaborative Governance Initiative. Status report on the neural dominance matrix, Zeichtheller demanded, though at this point he suspected he was asking about the operational status of his own sanity. The matrix has been repurposed, sir, Mordak replied with the tone of someone explaining that their house had been burglarized by someone who left everything cleaner and better organized than before. The subject appears to have converted it into what she's calling a mutual understanding facilitator. It's now designed to promote empathy, communication and collaborative problem-solving between species. Sir, it's actually working better than the original design, and our test subjects are reporting improved mental health and job satisfaction. The magnificent absurdity of the situation becoming clear. The most advanced mind control technology in galactic history had been accidentally transformed into a therapy device by someone whose greatest concern appeared to be whether the hegemony provided adequate vacation time for their employees. The human's consciousness, operating on principles of practical improvement and basic human decency, had encountered a system designed for oppression and instinctively redesigned it to be more helpful. Sir, we're receiving communications from across the sector, Mordak announced, his voice now reaching frequencies typically reserved for emergency broadcasts about universe-ending catastrophes. Word has spread about our situation. The Andromedans are requesting copies of our new efficiency protocols. The collective worlds want to implement our updated communication standards, and the ethereal planes are asking if we can share our empathy enhancement technology. News of the hegemony's accidental transformation was spreading across the galaxy faster than gossip at a diplomatic reception. Species that had spent millennia hiding from hegemony forces were now sending delegations to study their new approaches to interstellar relations. The empire that had built its reputation on fear and subjugation was suddenly being praised for innovation in collaborative governance and employee satisfaction program. The regional council is demanding an explanation for why our conquest statistics have been replaced with citizen happiness metrics. Mordak continued, his professional composure now existing in a state of quantum uncertainty. And sir, the Central Command wants to know why our military budgets have been automatically reallocated to education and infrastructure development programs. The human, meanwhile, had apparently finished her mental audit of galactic civilization, and was now pondering whether their species had considered the benefits of community gardens, and wondering if they'd ever tried organizing potluck dinners as a diplomatic tool. Her stream of consciousness suggestions had created a cascade of policy changes that were transforming the hegemony from a feared empire into what political scientists would later classify as an accidental utopia run by bureaucratic artificial intelligence, with surprisingly good instincts. Sir? Mordak announced with the voice of someone delivering news that would require updating every textbook in the galaxy. I'm receiving reports from 17 systems that our former subjugation colonies are now requesting to remain part of the hegemony voluntarily. They're saying they've never had better working conditions, more responsive government services, or more effective conflict resolution programs. Commander Zixther stood in his command center watching his screens display efficiency reports, citizen satisfaction survey, and something called quarterly empathy assessments, while trying to process the fact that his species had accidentally conquered more territory through inadvertent competence than they'd ever managed through intentional force. The human had somehow transformed their empire into the kind of organization that other civilizations wanted to join rather than flee from.
What are your orders, sir?
Mordak asked, though his tone suggested he was no longer entirely certain what kinds of orders were appropriate for their new reality.
Zixthala looked at the human, who was still sitting in her chair with the expression of someone mentally organizing their kitchen cabinets while simultaneously composing a grocery list, and wondering whether the hegemony had considered implementing recycling programs. She had defeated their most advanced technology not through superior force or cunning strategy, but through the simple application of practical problem-solving and an apparently genetic inability to leave well enough alone when things could obviously be improved. Open a communication channel to Central Command, he finally said, his voice carrying the resigned tone of someone who had just realized that his species' greatest military defeat had somehow resulted in their most successful administrative reform. Inform them that the pacification mission has been successfully completed. The humans have been integrated into hegemony society. He paused, watching as his screens displayed reports of improved interstellar relations, more efficient resource distribution, and what appeared to be the first voluntary expansion of hegemony territory in recorded history. And Mordak, he added with the weary wisdom of someone who had learned that the universe's sense of humor was both vast and particularly vindictive, recommend that all future human contact missions be classified as diplomatic rather than military operations. Apparently, we've been approaching this species from entirely the wrong angle. The human, blissfully unaware that she had just conquered a galactic empire through the revolutionary application of common sense and constructive criticism, was now mentally wondering if anyone had remembered to feed her cat and whether the hegemony might benefit from implementing a better system for handling customer complaints.